What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And this video is about what would happen if people who are on YouTube, particularly those that had some affiliation in the streets or some affiliation in prison, went back to prison or went to prison. And it's in response to, or it's a reaction to a friend of mine, Paul, who sent me a video that he did recently on the LA Times channel. I will link to that video at the end of this. And I think he did a great job. And he had raised that question and gave his perspective, particularly as somebody from down south, right? And so I thought I would chime in and kind of expand on what that would be for folks up north, but then also clarify that it really depends on what group you're talking about, and sometimes even what state you're talking about. And so to start with Norteños, right? Northerners, those that are NF members or Northern Structure, Nuestra Raza members, et cetera, which is my background, right? If you are on YouTube talking about prison and you go back to prison or you go to jail, you are going to be in trouble. Trouble to the extent that you are not going to be allowed to program on what nowadays they call active yards or general population yards. And the reason is you're not allowed to talk about those things on camera, right? The organizations, the NF, the Norteños / Northern Structure, they have a history of being secretive organizations, even though functionally that's not actually how it works out, right? You see people on YouTube showing filters and doing all kinds of stuff who have not been in the life for a very long time. So the secrets don't really stay secrets oftentimes. You can Google the Constitution, you can Google the bonds, which all used to be very privileged information. But nonetheless, these groups do not want you coming on YouTube talking about them, right? And so, yeah, you would be in trouble. Now, most of the people on YouTube would not be able to walk in the general population anyways, because of things they did before coming on YouTube, right? Most folks did not leave prison in good standing. And so it's kind of irrelevant, the fact that they're talking on YouTube and would get in trouble if they went back, because they'd be in trouble anyways. But even those like myself who left prison in good standing, that standing is out the window now because of my actions on YouTube, because of my conversations on YouTube, because of some of the people I associate with, and even outside of that, just some of the things that I talk about, right? Because I do talk about prison sometimes. I do talk about prison politics. I don't necessarily talk favorably about, about different organizations in prison, including the NF, which is the group I'm probably most critical of. And so, yeah, like for example, myself, if I went back, that's a wrap in the general population. And so because of YouTube, because of what I do and how I operate on YouTube, it's not something I'm concerned about because I have been out of prison for a long time and I don't conduct myself in a way which makes me too much at risk for going back to prison. The same is true for those down south. Now, not everybody on YouTube who has a background of being in prison or a background of affiliated talks about prison, right? You've got rappers that flaunt their affiliation, you know what I mean, with bandanas, with lyrics, with hand signs, with the whole nine. So it's no question who they rock with. Some of those folks have been to prison. They would not face consequences going back to prison, even though they're amplifying that lifestyle, because they're doing it in an artistic fashion, right? And generally in those songs, they're not necessarily talking about prison politics, right? They're gangbanging. And so that's okay. There's a channel called Active War Stories. If you haven't seen it, I suggest you check it out. I don't know if that individual's a gang member or affiliated or whatnot, and even if I did, I wouldn't talk about it on here because they don't talk about it on there. But they have been to prison, they talk about that, right? And yet I would suspect, and it's just a suspicion, I'm not any kind of a decision maker or whatever, but if they were to go back to prison, I would suspect that they probably wouldn't have a rough time because the content that they talk about is not exposing anything. And also they don't expose themselves, right? So So you don't even know who they are or anything. And so I would assume, based on just my experience with these organizations, based on stuff that I hear, that they would be fine, right? Now, we have another channel, for example, Nate Dogg 916. If you haven't checked out his channel, I encourage you to. I like Nate, right? And Nate and I talk, and he's talked publicly about this. I've also talked with him privately about it, and so I feel comfortable stating this. He, he identifies with a group from his neighborhood, and he identified with that group in prison. I'm not going to get into the specifics of it. You can go look at his channel, talk to him. If he were to go back in custody, and he did a stretch, right? He did about twice as much time in prison as I did. If he were to go back, and he left in good standing and whatnot, he likely wouldn't have any issues. Because he doesn't talk about stuff according to their politics, right? According to not just Black politics, because not all Black folks that are in the California Department of Corrections fall up under the same guidelines or expectations or whatnot. But if he were to go back to prison, amongst his folks, he would likely be fine, right? He didn't do anything. He left prison cool. He didn't betray anybody or otherwise. And the content on his channel and the stuff he talks about on his channel doesn't really reflect or doesn't expose, so to speak, anything that would put him in danger, right? And honestly, with his channel, a lot of his conversations aren't even about prison, right? I wouldn't say he has a prison channel, even though he's been in prison. He does talk about that stuff sometimes. Kind of hard not to when you spend, a significant time behind the wall. But so that's an example of somebody who is a YouTuber, right? And has a cool following. He's pretty well known in the YouTube community, that could go back to prison. Prayerfully, he doesn't, and he doesn't conduct himself in a way that really puts himself at risk. But if the unthinkable happened, he could walk the yard in level 4 just fine. And I'm sure he could make some decisions on YouTube that would put that in jeopardy, but he doesn't. So it varies, right? Another friend of mine, Tim from Texas Prison Stories, I would suggest you check out his channel if you're not aware as well. He's been on YouTube for a very long time, longer than a lot of the channels in this kind of genre. And, he's affiliated. Again, he affiliated in the streets. He was affiliated in prison. You can go to his channel to learn more about that. But he's from Texas. He's done all his time in Texas. And he is pretty clear about if he were to go back in custody, he'd be fine. Again, hopefully it doesn't happen. I don't want to see anybody go to the joint. But he would be fine because according to the standards and the politics that he lives up under, or lived up under when he was incarcerated and still upholds today, he hasn't done anything to jeopardize his reputation or jeopardize his good name amongst his people. Maybe that's the best way to put it. And so, and he talks to other people from Texas that have a good reputation and are in good standing with whatever folks they rock with. So their politics are different. He would be fine. I think it just varies, right? Now, like I said, you got a lot of YouTubers, not just on the West. I've caught wind lately of some other folks, right? Doc TV and all just other cats that have done things in real life, right? Not just on camera, but have done things in real life, which they could never walk a yard, a general population yard in prison. So their name is not in good standing, and it really ain't got nothing to do with YouTube. So that's kind of my feedback on it. That's my thought is, and even folks that get interviewed on channels, that can jeopardize, right? There's the whole thing of the active Northerner in High Desert doing an interview on Tony's channel, right? Stories written by a current prisoner. Tony was strongly discouraged from posting that video, but the youngster was in a pickle and he kind of insisted and it backfired, right? He was told after the interview, but but before the interview aired, if anybody does the interview, that's a wrap. And it's something that is not new, right? And I'll get into that in a second. He wound up getting killed in prison. And he was killed because he gave that interview, right? So there's that element too. That's why most of the people, I don't want to say all because I don't know everybody, but most of the people that are currently incarcerated who do interviews on channels, they are people that are already in bad standing with their own, right? They're housed separate from the general population, they're SNY, they're whatever. And so them speaking on camera or them speaking over the phone, again, it doesn't matter. They can't walk a general population yard because of stuff off of YouTube. And so there's really no risk, there's no added risk to them. And so that's kind of the rundown, right? And according to Paul and other people that I've talked to, the same is true down south. Now, I've done interviews with formerly incarcerated people, and those interviews, to the best of my knowledge and to the best of their knowledge, that doesn't put them in jeopardy, because when they come on here, my goal is not to drill down into the politics of prison or how they function in the politics in prison or anything of that nature. I'm more interested in other elements of their story, right? Folks that have been incarcerated are more than just their incarceration. Folks that have, been about gangbanging or functioning with organizations or whatever in the streets are more than just those activities. Like we're more complicated than just that. We have interest and knowledge about stuff, but oftentimes, not always, but most of the time, that go beyond prison and go beyond gangs and go beyond that stuff. And so those are kind of the conversations that generally I'm more interested in having. I'll link to the playlist of conversations I've had with people at the end. I did an interview with a Nuestra Familia member. Right now, he's not incarcerated. He doesn't even live in this country. He left prison in good standing. I'm not 100% clear on kind of his position now, but it was a great interview, and even then, I wasn't trying to get into his specific backgrounds, right? I was more interested in his story as an individual, and I know him personally. We were sellers in the corporate shoe, and so I count him as a personal friend, independent of, the fact that when we lived together, he was an NF member, I was an NR member, and so we were joined by gang stuff, so to speak. But our friendship transcends that. I've been out of prison a very long time. He's been out of prison even a little bit longer. And so doing interviews even can be dangerous, can impact somebody's standing with various gangs and groups. And that's kind of it. At the end of the day, it's up to any individual that comes on YouTube in whatever form, whether they pop in on a channel, whether they're in the comments and their name is identifiable, whether they do an interview, whether they're over the phone, whether they start their own channel, right? Whatever context they engage, it's up to the individual to understand how that's going to play out in terms of the folks that they rock with, and nobody can say, broadly speaking, this is always what's going to happen in every situation. Like I said, there are some situations that are pretty damn clear, but it varies, right? So I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that anybody that's been to the joint that's on YouTube can't go back to the joint. That's not necessarily true. Anybody that's banging in the streets or has been banging in the streets that comes on YouTube in some way can't go back. That's not true. You see people get interviewed all the time in terms of their music or in terms of other stuff that doesn't have to do with prison, where they identify themselves or it's well known who they rock with, but they're not talking about that stuff. Then I would expect them to be fine when they go back to prison. So that's it, man. The answer to the question is it depends. Now, again, for California, for norteños, sureños, those that fall up under those titles, no, you can't. And that stretches back to even when I was in prison, right? They used to bring camera crews on the yard This only happened at Solano. I never saw this happen elsewhere. So on a level 3 art in Solano, they would bring groups of people sometimes. And I don't know exactly who they were. So I don't want to say they were part of a particular show or whatever. And even without the camera, they would bring people around, outside people that were not staff or COs or whatever. They bring them around the yard. And sometimes they would talk to people. It was very well situated and well known. That doesn't happen with us, right? You don't talk to people, and it don't matter. You got another homeboy standing with you. Nothing else matters. You don't talk to these people walking around the yard. Now, homeboys would go do some push-ups real quick behind the handball wall and stand there and flex at a distance. People would, reckless eyeball the ladies walking and that sort of thing. There was no whistling, there was no cat calling, there was no disrespecting, but there was looking. And so from a distance, in that sense, I suppose if they had a camera, they could have gotten a shot of us across the yard. That you don't really have no control over, because you don't have control over when they bring a camera on the yard. But all that, talking, like you see videos from San Quentin where they just go around and chop it up with folks. Somebody's doing an interview and there's people behind them hooting and hollering and stuff. If you notice, you've never seen a northerner or a southerner or anybody up under that lane, right, do one of those interviews or conversations or sound bites who is in good standing with their own people. It doesn't happen, right? And so that's where that comes from. Long before YouTube, long before social media, you just don't do that. It used to be the case in prison that you don't even acknowledge to COs if you're affiliated, right? That I think that's changed a little bit, and the politics of prison have changed, and they'll continue to change. In particular, in California, nobody really knows what it's going to look like to do time in California in 10 years. Nobody does. But what has not changed is you can't engage as a homeboy, quote unquote, no matter where you're from, with these different media outlets. And YouTube is frankly a media outlet. So that's my 2 cents, right? I'd encourage you to check out the other channels that I mentioned. I will link to them in the top of this video. As I put it up, I'll put little cards that point to their channels. They're all great channels. They all have, great content, right? So there it is. That's my 2 cents. If you're on YouTube talking about prison and talking about gangs, and in particular, if you're talking about raza and stuff in California, you gonna have a problem if you go back to prison. Like I said, most people would have a problem anyways for activities before YouTube, but even if not, you're not safe to come on here and do that. If you come on YouTube and you talk about stuff other than prison, and you talk about stuff other than gangs, and you don't connect yourself to any particular group, and you're a raza from California, or you identify with northerners or southerners, then I think it's a case-by-case basis, really. That's it. Help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it, and help your community, man, because they need you. Take care. Check out the other content that I have. Check out Paul's video from the LA Times, and I'll catch you guys on the next one, man.